So this video is going to be a quick overview of the framework through which I think about Japanese pitch accent and how I would recommend that you think about Japanese pitch accent as well, and also how this kind of framework is implemented into the new MIA Japanese support Anki add-on. Now, if you have never been introduced to how Japanese pitch accent works before, then this video is probably going to be difficult to follow, and so this is kind of for people who at least have a basic grasp of how pitch accent works. So one basic way to think about Japanese pitch accent is that what's important is the drop, right? It's all about, first of all, is there a drop within any given word? Yes or no? And if there is a drop, then where is it? Because once it does drop, then generally it doesn't go back up. And so one way to think about pitch accent is in terms of numbers, right? We can say, first of all, is there a drop, yes or no? If there's no drop in the word, then it's a 0. For example, seikatsu, the whole word is flat, there is no drop. Or if there is a drop, we can say, where is the drop? Because the pitch drops normally happen between two syllables. And so we can say, what is the last syllable before the drop? And so we can say, for example, maybe it drops right after the first syllable, like jinsei. Or maybe it drops after the second syllable, like hana. Or maybe it drops after the third syllable, like ikimono. And so this is one pretty basic way of thinking about pitch accent because it's just a single number, right? Every word, either it's a 0 because it has no drop, or it does have a drop and you just remember what number it is, and then you know it drops after that syllable. Now, the other common framework for thinking about pitch accent is in terms of the four main patterns. So it can be heiban if it doesn't have a drop. It's a tamadaka if the drop is after the first syllable. It's nakadaka if the drop is after one of the middle syllables, and odaka if the drop is after the word ends, meaning that the attaching particle attaches on low. Now, it might seem at first that the number system is superior because the problem with the four categories is that nakadaka is a little bit ambiguous. For example, with ikimono, right? If we had ikimono and we were told that it was nakadaka, because there is two different syllables in the middle, we wouldn't know whether the drop is after the ki or after the mo, just by knowing that it's nakadaka. Whereas if we know that the pitch accent is after the third syllable, it's more precise. So there's some ambiguity in nakadaka words, but besides that kind of small downside, I think that overall, using the four categories actually has a lot of benefits that these don't have. First of all, when you're actually speaking Japanese and you want to make sure that you're pronouncing a word correctly, or even when you're just reading Japanese and you want to make sure that you're reading it out loud correctly, it's a lot easier in your mind to be thinking in terms of categories rather than numbers. Because let's just say, for example, we have a word like kotoba, which happens to be odaka, or a 3, right? Because the drop is after the third syllable. Because if it's odaka and it's 3 syllables, that means that the drop is after the third syllable. So if you're reading and you come across the word kotoba and you remember, oh, this is a 3, then in your head you have to basically count the syllables and go kotoba, okay, it's after the ba. Whereas if you've memorized that it's odaka, you just know, okay, it drops after the last syllable. So it's just, you just say the word and then you know that it's going to drop after that. And so that makes it easier to think about in your head. And the other thing is that there's a lot of words in Japanese that are nakadaka that basically have two different possible pitch accents. For example, the word tatemono, right? So this is 4 syllables, it's nakadaka, but it can be pronounced with the drop after the te or after the mo. And there's actually a lot of words like this. For example, if you take the word samazama, it's also nakadaka and the drop can be after the ma or after the za. So I think what this kind of goes to show is that within the heads of Japanese people, they're unconsciously thinking of pitch accent in terms of these four categories, because whenever there's words with nakadaka that are ambiguous because they're 4 or more syllables long, well, they actually pronounce them both of the possible ways. Not all the time, but a decent amount of the time. And so I think this kind of just goes to show that, they're thinking in terms of the four patterns. And the other thing is that once you start to get a little bit more adept with pitch accent, you start to realize that, in a way, the most important part of Japanese pitch accent isn't where the drop is, but it's kind of just the way that the word is pronounced, because each of these 4 different patterns has a kind of really unique archetypal sound pattern to it. And the metaphor I like to use to explain this is that if you heard, for example, a trumpet and a flute both playing the same exact melody at the same exact tone, you would still easily be able to tell which was a flute and which was a trumpet. And this is just because flutes and trumpets have a unique sound to them. They just sound inherently different. And in the same way, there's just a unique ring to a heiban word, there's a unique ring to an odaka word, and so on and so on. And once you start to really train your ear to pay attention to pitch accent, this becomes very obvious. For heiban, if you have a word like seikatsu, just has this eerie, flat ring to it. If you say a tamadaka word like jinsei, you just hear that it has this giant release of energy right after the beginning of the word and then tapers off. Odaka words have this sense of building up to a peak and then suddenly falling down. And basically, the reason why it's possible to listen to fast, blurry speech and still be able to accurately hear the pitch accents of words is because, although you might not be able to hear the exact place where it's rising and falling, you can hear which general archetypal sound pattern is a word being pronounced as. Because even in blurry, mumbled speech, a heiban word still has that eerie ring to it, and a tamadaka word still has that release of energy at the beginning to it, and so on. And so, in general, I think it's just more useful to think in terms of the 4 patterns because, first of all, it's easier in your head because it's simpler information to process, is the drop at the beginning of the word, in the middle, or at the end, right? It's just simpler to process than trying to count numbers when you're speaking. And also, that's, I think, how Japanese people actually process pitch accent in their brain. And that's also kind of just seems to be the reality of pitch accent once you really train yourself to hone into the sound patterns. Now, the thing is that I like to add an additional category onto these 4 patterns. And that is what I'm going to be explaining now. So basically, a lot of Japanese scholars who talk about pitch accent do the same thing as well, because actually it makes the most logical sense, as you'll see in a minute. But basically, how I'm going to explain it is that there's certain things in Japanese pitch accent that are really just a binary. There's only 2 possibilities. Either it's A or it's B. And this is especially true for verbs and for i-adjectives. So pitch accent wise, there's only 2 different types of verbs. Either the verb is going to be heiban, for example, like neru, warau, asobu. These are all flat. Or we have verbs that are -2. So what I mean by -2 is means counting from the end of the word, the drop is after the second to last syllable. So for example, if we had kaku or dasu, so counting from the end, we have 1, 2, the drop is going to be after the ka. Same thing with dasu, su, da, this is the second to last syllable, so the drop's going to be after the da. Then for 3-syllable verbs like taberu or hashiru, again, counting from the end, ru, be, the drop's going to be after the be, and then ru, shi, the drop's going to be after the shi. So we can see it's after the second to last one each time. And even if we take 4-syllable verbs like no no shiru or kara kao, again, it's going to be, as long as it's not a heiban verb, then the drop is going to be from the second to last syllable. No no shiru, kara kao. So really, no matter how many syllables the word is, it's going to be -2. And thinking of it in terms of -2, it actually simplifies things, because if you think of it in terms of, first of all, the numbers, counting from the beginning of the word, then these 2 right here are going to be 1, these are going to be 2, and these are going to be 3. So they're all different, right? Whereas you can sum all of these up into a single category by just thinking of them as -2. And even if you think of them in terms of the 4 categories, then we have that these 2 are going to be a tamadaka, and these 2 are, and the other ones are going to be nakadaka. And so, although this is a little bit better, you still have 2 different categories that could be summed up under a single label, right? And you want to have as few different categories as possible because that makes things easier to remember. But the biggest reason why it's beneficial to think of verbs in terms of either heiban or non-heiban or -2 is that the conjugation patterns match that. So there's only 2 different conjugation patterns for verbs. There's the heiban conjugation patterns and the -2 conjugation patterns. So let me show you what I mean. So if we, for example, took the nai form of a verb. So if a heiban verb goes into the nai form, the whole thing stays flat. So nenai, wara, wa nai, soba nai. So the whole thing is going to be flat. And it doesn't matter whether the verb is an u verb or a ru verb or whatever. If it's heiban, then the nai form is going to be heiban. Now, for non-heiban verbs, it's going to drop before the nai, and it doesn't matter how many syllables the verb is long. So if we have kakanai, then the drop is going to be before the nai. Same thing with dasanai, it's going to be before the nai. Tabe nai, it's going to be before the nai. Hashiranai, before the nai. No shiranai is before the nai, and karakawa nai before the nai. So again, by thinking of it in terms of non-heiban or -2, then in our head it's quite simple to remember how the conjugation is going to happen, because we just remember, oh, it's before the nai. And I know when I'm speaking, and I know it's a non-heiban verb, I kind of just intuitively know, like, okay, it drops before the nai. Karakawanai deo, or like hashiranai deo. Whatever. It's like very easy to formulate in your head. It simplifies things, and you want to make things as simple for yourself as possible. And everything I just said also applies to i-adjectives as well, because i-adjectives are also either heiban, like amai or karui, or non-heiban, like yoi, takai, mijikai, tatai, for example. And all the ones that are not heiban drop after the second to last syllable. So that means that if it's 2 syllables, it's going to be a tamadaka. And if it's more than 2 syllables, it's going to be nakadaka. It basically always drops before the i, or after the second to last syllable. So again, instead of trying to remember the numbers in terms of like, okay, yoi is a 1, takai is a 2, mijikai is a 3, tatakai is a 4. It's easier to just think, oh, they're all non-heiban, which means the drop is before the i. So yoi, takai, mijikai, tatakai. It's just way more intuitive in your head once your brain kind of gets it. It's like, oh, it just is high until the E, and then the E is low. It's very intuitive. And it also applies to the conjugations. For example, if you wanted to say like, yokute, takakute, mijikakute. Again, the drop is going to be before the ku. So, yokute, takakute, mijikakute. And so, again, you can think of it in terms of, oh, it doesn't matter how many syllables long the word is. It's not heiban, which means it drops before the ku. And so this greatly simplifies things in your head. And so basically, I call, and also Japanese scholars call this non-heiban category kifuku, because that basically just means that it has peaks and valleys, or that it's not flat. And so in my pitch accent system, and the system which the MIA Japanese support add-on follows, there's 5 different categories for color. For verbs and i-adjectives, they're either heiban, which is blue, or kifuku, which is purple. And for all the other parts of speech, then they're just following the traditional 4 patterns. So that's the deal. Again, I think it's better to think in terms of the patterns, or in case of the MIA Japanese support add-on, the colors, because even though that nakadaka can be ambiguous, it's pretty rare because a lot of nakadaka words are 3 syllables, which means there's only one possibility. A lot of nakadaka words are combination words, like for example, if you had like keitai denwa, even though that's technically nakadaka, since it's a compound noun, the pitch accent rules are following the noun combination rules, which means you can know the pitch accent even without looking it up. And also a lot of words that you would think would be ambiguous actually are just pronounced both ways by Japanese people. And again, it makes it so that overall it's much simpler. There's just 5 categories. You can easily sort these words into these 5 categories, and then remembering how to conjugate them and so on becomes very simple, because if you know what pattern the word is and you know how that pattern conjugates, well then you're pretty much automatically good to go.